This video will contain spoilers for Act 1 and 2 of Silksong. Hello there! Have you been following the discourse around Silksong lately? If not, let me summarize it for you. One side is complaining that Silksong is too difficult to be fun, while the other argues that difficulty makes for a more interesting and fulfilling experience, at least for some. Okay, well now that you're all caught up, let's ask the meta question: is this the right discussion to be having? Well, no, not in the way it's currently unfolding. Let me tell you why. See, it's not the fact that people are discussing Silksong's difficulty that's the problem, but the way in which it's being discussed. Here is the framework that you've likely been sold. Difficulty is a scale that goes from easy to hard, and while most can agree that Silksong is a relatively hard game, the disagreement is over whether or not that's appropriate, whether Silksong is too difficult. Through this particular conceptual framework, I can tell you who's right. It's the people who think Silksong is just a difficult game and you should go play something else or get good. The reason this group has the moral high ground in regard to this specific framing of the discussion is because I don't think there's something inherently wrong about making a difficult game. Who's to say that all games should be easy or that all games should be hard? I don't think anyone can. Both choices seem valid. Silksong clearly wasn't meant to be a cakewalk, and it isn't, so what's the problem? Well, I'll tell you what the problem is. This is a terrible conceptual framework for analyzing difficulty. And the reason why it's terrible is that not all difficulty is created equal. Let me illustrate. Imagine fighting a boss that takes 3 minutes of intense concentration to overcome. There's no way you're beating it on your first try, and even once you get good enough to have a shot at victory, every second requires your full attention. You're dodging an attack, then retaliating. Dodge, retaliate. Maybe you learned some cool tech that allows you to land an extra hit. That's perfect. Your skill and knowledge is being rewarded. After an hour of failed attempts, getting closer and closer to victory each time, you finally overcome the boss. Sweating, panting, you clench your fist and let out a yes! A difficult fight, but a fight well won. Now imagine fighting another boss. This fight is not as hard, but challenging enough to demand your full attention, and this time the encounter lasts 10 minutes instead of 3. Now imagine that after reducing the boss to 0 hit points, right before he dies, he casts a final devastating spell. Even though you were at full health, you're instantly killed and brought back to your last save point. You lost the fight and have to try again. The spell, which the boss will cast every time he reaches 0 hit points, has a 90% chance of killing you no matter your current HP, and a 10% chance to backfire and slay the boss instead. Okay, so I imagine you have a picture in your head of which boss you'd rather go up against, but here's the interesting part. There are some people who would defend a boss like the one I just described, and maybe they would even put it above the other one. These people would say things like, "Oh, but having the 90% chance of instant death is what I love about this fight." Or, "Having a 90% chance to be killed, it just shows how weak your character is in comparison to this very powerful foe." Or, "Luck is a very important part of boss fights. If you could just win by being good at the game, the boss would get boring. You need that 90% chance of instant death to keep it interesting, don't you understand?" Listen, I'm not trying to be cynical about this. I see where this group of people is coming from. There's something honorable about a real challenge, and luck can certainly be utilized effectively to make a fight more interesting. But if you can't admit that there are better and worse implementations of difficulty, then we can't have an honest discussion about it. Because there is a difference between a boss that relies on quick reaction times and knowledge of the fight, and one that has a 90% chance of instantly killing you upon defeat. They're both examples of difficulty, but not all difficulty is created equal. To summarize, I believe the current discussion about whether or not Silksong is too hard is the wrong discussion. Most people agree that Silksong is at least relatively hard, and that's absolutely fine. Some games are easier, some are harder, and which you prefer will vary depending on who you are. The right question to ask is, does Silksong have good difficulty? Now that obviously raises the question, how is good defined? We're entering value-laden territory here, which tends to get a bit messy. There are certainly people who have already jumped off the wagon as soon as they heard the word good, now kindly about to let me know in the comments that good and bad are actually subjective terms and there's no point in having this discussion. I have a video for those people and I'll link to it down below. For the rest of you, those who have an open mind to the idea that some design choices, like giving the boss a 90% chance to instantly kill you, might be worse than others, let's try approaching the question of what is good difficulty together. Now, we have to do this both carefully and diligently because universal values are hard to nail down. But I don't think this is entirely pointless. Stick with me and hear me out. I have some theories about what might constitute good and bad difficulty, and after I've shared my thoughts, I'd love to hear yours in the comments. But before we continue, I'm thrilled to announce the first ever sponsor of the Holland channel, Wand. Wand is a desktop app with easy-to-use tools that remove any obstacle to having fun in over 3,500 single-player PC games, including games like Cyberpunk, Horizon Forbidden West, and yes, both Hollow Knight and Silksong. Even better, Wand automatically finds your game library so you don't have to spend time looking for the games you play. I've been trying to get through this gate for ages. I just can't figure out how you're supposed to open it. Well, that's where Wand comes in. By simply pressing Alt and W, I can bring up the in-game overlay. Here I can navigate over to a part of the map I want help with, and by scrolling down and clicking on Hidden Paths, Wand helps me figure out where I'm supposed to go without me having to spend time looking it up online. Wait, there's a secret path by the Bellway? I never noticed. Cheers, Wand. But Wand doesn't just help with navigation, it also offers tools like a movement speed slider to help you get back to where you died, or a damage multiplier if you just need a slight edge against that one frustrating boss. One of my favorite resources is the infinite tool usage, which allows me to get comfortable with all of my new tools without me having to constantly worry about running out of shards, and I can always turn the switch back off when I'm done using it. So if you're like me and have ever gotten lost or stuck on a roadblock, then download Wand for free using my link in the description or by going to wand.gg/Holland. That's wand.gg/Holland. Thanks to Wand for sponsoring this video. Now let me remind you that I'm not talking about balance per se. You might, for example, argue that a boss is too easy or too hard for where it's located in the game. That's a valid criticism, but just because a boss is too difficult doesn't mean it has bad difficulty. It might just be poorly placed. With that said, I should give you a definition of bad difficulty so we know roughly what we're talking about. I don't know that this definition is all-encompassing, but I think it works as a general framework. So here it is. Bad difficulty wastes the player's time or takes away his agency. Let's start by looking at difficulty that wastes the player's time. Now, I think this is the hardest of the two criteria to pin down because it's not so easy to define what is actually a waste of time. You know, some would consider watching my videos a waste of time, but that's neither here nor there. One thing that immediately comes to mind are runbacks. Having to run all the way from halfway home to Moorwing or from the Bellway bench to Bilehaven can feel repetitive and pointless. After just one or two runbacks, you've already shown that you know how to do this part, and all you really want to do is just get back to that stupid frog so you can learn how to dodge his stupid bouncy poison balls. And fair enough, to me both of these runbacks certainly border on wasting the player's time, and I think you could argue that there should be benches closer by. Well, there is a bench closer to Bilehaven, but it seems that most people only discover that after having conquered the area, which makes it arguably a bit too hidden for how important it is. I think it's hard to argue that runbacks don't at least have the potential to feel like a waste of time. Now, certainly some people will claim that these just add to the experience, but even these people must concede that at a certain point, it's too much. For example, what if dying to Grohl deleted your save file and the runback was having to replay the entire game for another shot at victory? I have a hard time believing many would defend that as adding to the experience. Fine, so runbacks can certainly be too long, but can they be too short as well? In a rare moment of intellectual humility, I must admit that I haven't had enough time to think about it to give a proper answer. I don't think it's as easy as just remove all runbacks, especially because they aren't so easily defined. Do you consider an arena fight before a boss part of the runback? How about a super easy first phase? Both could certainly be described as things you've already mastered, but at what point are you taking away too much of the lead up to the final phase? Undoubtedly, runbacks deserve a video of their own, and so I shall say little more about them now, though I will add one last thing because I believe it's crucial for deciding whether a runback constitutes good or bad difficulty, and that is how fair the runback is. I actually had quite a fun time in Bilewater, which abruptly ended once I reached the Bilehaven arena. I did not have a fun time here, and a large part of that was due to the runback. Not only because of the length, but because of the enemies you have to pass. You know them, you hate them, the evasive Stilkins. These monsters are an essential part of what makes the runback so frustrating. They jump around randomly, evading your attacks and being impossible to hit. Their projectiles target your general location, but are never quite predictable enough to where you can comfortably dodge them. And they can pop out of nowhere, hitting you with contact damage before you even have a chance to react, as can they damage you on their way down back into the muck, where they belong. Random, unintuitive, and untelegraphed, the Stilkin makes for a terrible addition to the Bilehaven runback, a frustrating enemy to face in general, and a smooth segue to my next example of bad difficulty. The Stilkin is just one example of the many enemies in Silksong that violate basic principles of player agency. And this is the other component of what I think makes for bad difficulty, the pilfering of agency. As a general principle of game design, you want the game to define the rules and show them to you clearly, and the player to make his own choices within the bounds of those rules. Now, both the player and the game must follow these principles, or else there will be trouble. The player can't do whatever he wants. He can't just jump in front of an incoming attack and expect not to take damage. Them's the rules, son. But the game also can't do whatever it wants. The game gets to set the rules, but after that it should stay out of the equation as much as possible. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, Holland, how can you just claim these things as self-evidently true? Well, I think they are actually definitional issues. A game is defined in relation to the player. If the player isn't part of the equation, then it's not a game. Maybe it's a slot machine, but it's not a game. And speaking of slot machines, that is certainly one way to rob the player of his agency, by making his chances of success depend on a dice roll. Now, that's not to say luck doesn't have its rightful place. The way I see it, good luck is something like a boss choosing between two roughly equally difficult attacks and then executing one or the other. That's not a problem because the player has, roughly the same chances against either attack. An example of where this is not done properly is in a lot of battle rooms, where you might notice that some attempts are significantly easier than others. Facing more than one regular enemy at a time has the problem of incoming attacks overlapping randomly, since each actor can do its own thing independent of the others. That's why battle arenas can have such a high range of difficulty. If you're lucky, only one enemy will attack you at a time and you can dispense with it relatively easily. But if you're unlucky, you'll get perfectly boxed in and feel like there was nothing to be done. Now, that's not to say there was nothing to be done. Maybe you could have used a tool or a spell to get out of that situation, but I'm just trying to make the point that RNG plays a huge role in the difficulty of battle arenas. This wide range of difficulty is bad because the randomness takes away your agency. Again, randomness certainly has its proper place, such as when Lace chooses an attack at random, all of which are roughly equivalent in difficulty. But just like difficulty, not all randomness is created equal. Now, what else can take away player agency? I think there are three more things: vague mechanics, inactive gameplay, and lackluster telegraphing. Some attentive viewers might recognize these three labels, combined with erratic outcomes, which we just discussed, as the four aspects of evil boss design. And yes, they are, so if you want to hear me talk more about each aspect, I'll link to that video down below. For now, let me briefly cover each aspect and why I believe they are synonymous with bad difficulty. Vague mechanics refers to attacks for which the correct response is unclear. For example, when fighting Grohl, it took a while before I understood where to place myself when he started spitting the acid balls. They're annoying to get hit by as they bounce all over the place because it's far from obvious how you're supposed to tackle them. An attack should implicitly hint at you how to dodge it, and most attacks do, such as when the reed pulls back its pin to signal that it's about to thrust forward. An intuitive telegraph that signals how to dodge the incoming attack. Funnily enough, inactive gameplay used to be all but a boss exclusive in the original Hollow Knight. However, in Silksong, a large proportion of regular enemies have ways to avoid being hit. These may include the enemy burrowing underground, flying out of reach, dashing away from your attacks, or entering a blocking or parrying stance that you either can't react to or which lasts right up until the enemy's next attack. All of these actions remove player agency by making the enemy effectively or literally immune to damage. Now, I should say, not all of these moves are equally horrible to deal with, and something like the Thread Raker going underground for a brief second, I don't mind nearly as much as erratic enemy backdashes. However, those I really dislike, especially because of their random nature, so this aspect certainly deserves a mention. And finally, lackluster telegraphing is when an enemy performs a dangerous action without giving you a chance to respond. I almost can't imagine I won't do a video on the repositioning problem for Silksong, so I'll leave this point for now and come back to it in a future video. Arguing against untelegraphed attacks is sort of my thing, and there's always plenty of spirited debate to be had on the issue. So I'd greatly encourage you to subscribe for when that video inevitably comes out. It'll be a good bit of fun, I'm sure. Anyway, I think that's enough said about bad difficulty. Now I want to talk about what makes for good difficulty. I put this section last because I wanted to get all the negative stuff out of the way first. As someone made me realize in the comment section, it's important not to get caught up in talking only about all the critical things there are to say about Silksong. I love Silksong, and even though I think it's plenty flawed, it's still one of my favorite games of all time. With that said, let me immediately follow up with something that could make me very unpopular. I've already likely made enemies with the group of people who love every single part of Silksong. So don't be confused when I now go ahead and make enemies with the other group, the people who criticize Silksong to death. Listen, if you're part of either of those groups, I think you're being a little bit too tribal, a little bit too radical, and a little bit too close-minded. Here's why I'm about to make enemies with the people who generally dislike Silksong. I don't agree that most enemies dealing 2 masks of damage is inherently a problem. I know. Calm down. See, here's the thing. We have to be honest about what fits our criteria for bad difficulty and what doesn't. If we don't follow a set of principles, then how is this anything but an expression of unexamined emotion? Bad difficulty wastes the player's time and takes away his agency. Do attacks that deal double damage waste the player's time or take away his agency? Well, no, unless you want to say that dying takes away your agency. But that's not appropriate because now you've included everything that kills you quickly inside the category of bad difficulty. You're essentially saying that the number of hits you can take has an effect on how fair the boss is, and that just makes no sense. Look, the fact that so many attacks deal 2 masks of damage certainly makes the game harder, there's no question about it. But now we're just back to the original shallow discussion about difficulty. Is Silksong too hard or not? There's no good answer to that question because people vary in the degree of difficulty they enjoy. Remember, I'm accepting the fact that Silksong is hard and then asking whether or not it presents the player with difficulty that feels challenging but fair or just frustrating. And I have to be honest, double mask damage is not inherently bad difficulty. The same is true for the Radiant game mode in the original Hollow Knight, where every hit kills you. Challenging for sure, but not inherently flawed. Now, what does tend to happen when enemies deal double damage, and I'll certainly agree on this, is that all of the unfair characteristics of those enemies shine through ever so brightly. If a boss has an unfair attack, but it only deals 1 mask of damage, you might not care that much. But if that same attack takes away almost half of your health bar, then you might start to notice and get frustrated. The problem is with the unfairness of the attack, not the damage. I hope that by defending, at least on principle, Team Cherry's decision to make so many enemy attacks deal double damage, you'll see that I'm really just trying to get at the truth and not play tribal games. It's no secret that I have my problems with Silksong, but if I wanted to play that game, the one where I destroy Silksong and tell you how terrible it is, I could have easily called double mask damage a horrible design choice and won the praise of people who want nothing more than to bring down Silksong. I'm not in that camp. I'm not in either camp. I'm in my own camp, and I'm alone here because I don't want anyone mindlessly agreeing with me just because I'm the YouTuber and you're the viewer. Make your own damn camp. Then you can say what's actually on your mind and not have to lie for the sake of pleasing the group. Anyway, double mask damage, it's harsh, but it doesn't inherently constitute bad or unfair difficulty. Actually, hold on, there is one more thing to say about double mask damage, and it's in regard to the new bind mechanic which replaces focus from the first game. Although both approaches have their ups and downs, I really do like the new bind, especially the fact that you can use it mid-air, which just instantly makes it feel twice as mechanically deep. However, the fact that being interrupted mid-heal both cancels the heal and wastes your entire silk gauge, it just honestly feels like too much. This is still under the good difficulty section, and it's because technically there's nothing inherently unfair about punishing the player this hard for getting hit while binding. But just because it's not unfair doesn't mean there isn't appropriate criticism to levy against this design choice. If you fail to bind against an attack that deals 2 damage, you will effectively lose 5 masks, the 3 you would have healed had you not been interrupted, and the 2 from the attack itself. In my opinion, that just feels like too much of a punishment for a single error, an error that in the original would only deal 2 to 3 masks of effective damage. Maybe having your bind interrupted should refund some silk, or only cancel the heal without dealing additional damage. Anything like that would certainly help. And no, putting on Warding Bell is not a solution, because that's a tool that costs you resources to alleviate this problem. But again, not inherently bad difficulty, and I have to be fair to my own criteria, just in my view a problem nonetheless. Now, putting all that aside and disregarding double mask damage for just a moment, how do you generally make good difficulty? Well, one answer is that you aim for the reverse of bad difficulty. So you try to give the player an appropriate challenge that doesn't feel like it's wasting his time, and you only rob him of his agency if it's absolutely necessary. Fights that do this well are the first lace encounter, fourth chorus, cogwork dancers, and the final boss. These battles have minimal downtime, clear telegraphs, intuitive ways to dodge them, and are not defined by randomness. Truly great fights. I fear that if I don't mention shards, people will bring them up in the comment section, so let me say this. There are certainly problems with the shard system, mainly the fact that you're liable to run out as you need them the most when you're struggling against a difficult encounter. But I also personally love finding shards, upgrading my tool pouches, crafting tools, etc. And so it's hard to propose a simple change to fix the system. I'll have to think more about the issue. Stay tuned for a video on shards. Lastly, I should mention the status effect you get when touching the maggot-infested waters of Bile Water. Again, worryingly, I also place this issue under good difficulty, and here's why. Bile isn't unfair in itself. Heck, it's one of the fairest ways you'll ever be inconvenienced, because the water never moves, and it's often your own fault when you fall in. What I do want to say about Bile is similar to what I said about bind interruption, which is simply that I think it's too punishing. Now, I actually love the implementation of status effects in Silksong, Frost, Fire, even Bile, but I do think it's strange just how many resources falling into Bile eats up. In a few select circumstances, such as when you're at or below 3 masks, I think you'd rather want to contract Bile than take 3 masks of damage, just because that would otherwise kill you. But in almost every other case, taking 3 masks of damage is actually preferable to touching the infested waters for just a second and getting afflicted. since clearing bile not only eats up an entire bind, but also drains your silk over time. The first time I contracted bile, I actually didn't notice it blocked my heel, and I just found it to be a cool environmental hazard that slowly ate up my silk. But then my brother pointed out that nope, it consumes your entire heel as well. And I just consider that too harsh of a punishment. In my opinion, one simple way to fix bile would just be to let you heal at least 1 or 2 masks while getting rid of the effect. Then, falling into the muck wouldn't feel as grossly punishing as it currently does. Pun intended. So, not to repeat myself, but this is not inherently bad difficulty. It is, however, a matter of hitting a good balance, which I don't think bile currently does. If you're only going to remember one thing from this video, I want you to remember this. Rating a game's difficulty on a 2-dimensional scale is not appropriate. Instead, you might consider difficulty an oblong container. As you fill it up, the game gets more difficult, but what you place inside the container really matters. Do you fill it with proper telegraphs, tight reaction windows, and intuitive attacks? Or do you stuff it full of erratic outcomes, vague mechanics, inactive gameplay, and lackluster telegraphing? As you fill up the container, you'll change the target audience. Some will leave because the game becomes too difficult, and others will join because they now find it appropriately challenging. No level of difficulty is the right level to aim at, but what you put in the container does help to either support or damage the overall experience. You don't have to agree with me 100% on what makes for good or bad difficulty. I don't have all the answers, and I'm always open to hearing respectful counterarguments. But to have any meaningful discussions about difficulty that don't just devolve into "it's too hard" or "get good, scrub," there are some things you have to agree on. You have to agree that there are generally better and worse design choices for a developer to make. For example, that dying unavoidably after a fight 90% of the time is not generally preferable. And you have to be honest with me, with each other, and most importantly with yourself. Do you actually think you would enjoy fighting a boss that killed you unavoidably 90% of the time, or are you just saying that to be a contrarian? This only works if you're being honest. YouTuber Neril once said about the original Hollow Knight, "It's as if the developers are daring you to stop playing." And at times throughout my Silksong playthrough, it sort of did feel like that, like I was being teased to the point where it wasn't funny anymore, just frustrating. You can make a tough video game, heck, you can make a brutal one, but you better make damn sure it feels like the player's fault when he dies. As you might imagine, I've been watching quite a few videos on Silksong's difficulty lately, and given how they inspired me to make this video, I feel compelled to mention at least some of them, all of which I'll link to down below, even if I would only recommend watching the last 2. Gorguinni made a video that, at least for me, fell into the category of Team Cherry can't do anything wrong. Every time Gorguinni came close to an actual criticism, he quickly turned it on its head. Bilehaven wasn't poorly designed, you see, because it stood in contrast to all the other times you were actually having fun. The good bosses are good because they're good, and the bad bosses are also good because they're bad. Conversely, Type 2 Productions criticized Silksong to the point of sounding obnoxious. As if they were parodying themselves, you can hear the brothers put on a whiny tone of voice at times throughout the video.
The new healing system also feels downright awful. It really feels like it exists just to punish you.
Every single thing that could possibly be criticized was torn to bits, placing the video well into the camp of Silksong didn't do anything right. As for reviews I actually enjoyed, the legendary Mark Brown made a, well, not super enlightening, but still relatively interesting video on the game's difficulty. He does touch on so-called BS for a brief moment halfway through, but then returns to speaking about difficulty on a more superficial level. It's still a worthwhile listen, even though I've come to expect a lot more from Mr. Brown. And then finally, there's a great video by a chap known as Second Wind who speaks fairly and eloquently about Silksong's difficulty. At one point, while talking about the High Halls Battle Arena, he says the following:
"I'm not complaining that it was hard, I'm complaining that it was hard in a very boring way."
Just spot on. Although personally I'd use unfair or unfun rather than boring, I think he hits the nail right on its head. His video is definitely worth watching. With all of that said, I'm Holland. This video took approximately 7 or 8 recording sessions to actually get recorded. thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll go give my voice a rest now. Goodbye.